In recent months, a phenomenon has been drawing attention behind the scenes of the conflict in Ukraine: the significant increase in desertions within the Ukrainian forces. With prolonged battles, resource shortages, and troop exhaustion, more and more soldiers are abandoning their positions. But what does this mean for the outcome of the war? And how does this connect to the recent negotiations between Russia and the United States regarding a possible ceasefire? Let's analyze these points now. Welcome to War and Geopolitics Daily. Here we cover the most important global events related to conflicts and geopolitics every day. Subscribe now so you don't miss our upcoming videos. Reports from Ukrainian soldiers describe an increasingly difficult scenario. With constant casualties and forced mobilization, troops' morale is in decline. The Ukrainian government has toughened punishments for desertion, but the numbers continue to rise, indicating widespread exhaustion of forces on the front lines. The shortage of weapons and logistical difficulties also weigh heavily. While the West continues to send military aid, Ukraine's infrastructure is overwhelmed, making it difficult to supply the troops adequately. The result? Entire units weakened and in some cases soldiers opting to flee rather than fight. Additionally, many of the mobilized soldiers lack proper military experience to handle the intensity of combat, making them vulnerable both physically and psychologically. Psychological exhaustion is the crucial factor for desertions. Many Ukrainian combatants have been on the front lines for months without sufficient rest periods. This results in a phenomenon known as combat fatigue, which reduces soldiers' decision-making ability and increases cases of emotional breakdowns and abandonment of posts. Testimonies from captured soldiers indicate that fear and despair are major factors in desertion, especially when they realize their chances of survival are minimal. Furthermore, forced recruitment has sparked outrage among the civilian population. There are reports of Ukrainian agents forcing men of fighting age to enlist, often against their will. This has led to an increase in attempts to flee Ukraine by citizens who fear being forcibly recruited and sent to the front lines without proper training. In parallel with this military crisis, diplomatic movements are gaining traction. According to recent reports, the United States and Russia are discussing, albeit discreetly, possibilities for a ceasefire. Although Kyiv officially rejects any negotiation involving territorial concessions, battlefield attrition and international pressure may force Zelensky to consider an alternative path. The United States, Ukraine's primary defense financier, is beginning to show signs of fatigue in its unrestricted support. After Donald Trump's election, he is seeking to avoid the political and financial burden of continuous military aid to a conflict with no quick victory in sight. American public opinion is becoming more skeptical about the costs of this war, and sectors of the U.S. Congress are already questioning the necessity of continuing to send billion-dollar aid packages to Ukraine. Another factor pressuring Washington to seek a diplomatic exit is the strengthening of relations between Russia and other countries, such as China and Iran. Russia has managed to circumvent many of the sanctions imposed by the West and continues to secure military and economic supplies that allow it to sustain the war. Additionally, Russia has found ways to bypass sanctions on gas and oil, selling them to partners like India and China. Moreover, the narrative that Ukraine can emerge victorious is being increasingly questioned by military analysts, who see Ukraine's defensive lines weakening under recent Russian advances, and Russia's numerical and logistical superiority. In Europe, war fatigue is also evident. Countries like Germany and France are showing signs of weariness and are beginning to debate internally how much longer they should continue financing Ukraine's defense. Nevertheless, in contrast to Trump's recent statements about ending aid to Ukraine, France and the UK are considering sending direct military support to Ukraine if a ceasefire is established. However, such actions could escalate the conflict further and place NATO in an even more precarious position. The harsh winter also raises concerns about energy shortages, especially for countries heavily dependent on Russian gas. This could be a decisive factor pushing European leaders to pressure Zelensky into negotiations. On the Russian side, Moscow appears to be taking a strategic stance. While the war depletes Ukraine's resources and weakens its forces, the Kremlin maintains a firm position that any ceasefire must include the recognition of its territorial occupation in parts of eastern Ukraine. For Putin, the war has already secured significant gains, and he is unlikely to accept an agreement that means relinquishing what has been conquered so far. Recent Russian offensives also indicate that Moscow maintains military initiative. Reports suggest advances on some fronts and strengthened defenses in annexed regions. If Russia perceives that Ukrainian resistance is collapsing, it may increase pressure to secure a favorable agreement in future negotiations. Another important factor is China's position. Beijing has maintained an ambiguous stance, economically supporting Russia while avoiding direct military involvement. However, if the United States intensifies its military support to Ukraine, China may expand its cooperation with Moscow, further complicating the conflict. The increase in desertions in the Ukrainian army could indicate that the war is reaching a breaking point. As soldiers lose the will to fight, diplomatic maneuvering intensifies behind the scenes. Are we witnessing the prelude to a ceasefire, or will Ukraine attempt to resist until the very last soldier? The truth is that the conflict has reached a stage where all sides are feeling the weight of the war. Ukraine faces growing difficulties in maintaining its defense. The United States grapples with internal political pressures. Europe fears prolonged economic impacts, and Russia seeks to consolidate its gains without major concessions. Ultimately, the central question remains: will there be a ceasefire in the coming months, or are we merely witnessing another phase in the prolongation of this conflict? Only time will tell. Leave your comment below and share your opinion on this potential shift in the war's direction. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more analysis on geopolitics and global conflicts.